Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Trustcast Show. And we're really happy to have with us Milena Goncalves. Welcome to the show, Milena.
Glad to be here, Zane. Thank you.
So today's guest spent years as a caseworker before fighting for foster kids, or fighting for foster kids before she ever became an attorney, and now runs a bilingual Bergen County family law practice. Anna, what was it about representing kids and families in crisis mode that made you feel like, I need to become an attorney and this is going to be my life's work?
Great question, Zane. So, I have a double major in psychology and sociology, and I just loved everything that had to do with children development, and how family interactions kind of shape that. When I graduated undergrad, I became a foster care caseworker in New York, and it was amazing to me. Number one, to see the amount of families that needed assistance, to see the amount of families that didn't have the resources necessarily to get that assistance, and how someone who was 20, 21 at the time, could shape someone's life. So I thought I was going to be a social worker for life. I applied to and got into my master's in social work program. And then I was guided by someone to take the LSAT, and that perhaps then I could help more families in different ways, long term, and still kind of stay in that system. But life had different plans, Zane. That was the intent for the last, I guess, I was a personal injury attorney. First as a paralegal, then as an attorney for the last 20 years, 3 years, so 17. Math isn't an attorney's strong point, right? So from '04 to '06, I was a paralegal at a personal injury firm. I went to law school at night and I worked during the day. So I did that, and when I got out, I'm like, okay, now I'm gonna find my calling in family law, and personal injury just stayed with me. So 3 years ago, I decided, or I don't think I decided, I think the universe decided for me that it was time to make a shift. And I knew that I needed to go back to where my heart was, which was family law. It's what I intended to start with, it's what makes me smile. And the experience that I had as a foster care caseworker has stayed with me forever. It's just built, it's part of who I am and how I approach every case, even in personal injury, if that makes sense. Just with the empathy and the understanding that people are human and they might be going through different things. So AMG Law was born, and I guess the easiest transition would have been to go into a law firm. And I decided to found AMG Law with the mission to kind of bridge that gap between Hispanic speaking families in Bergen and Passaic County and the family court system, because I feel that there's a need for someone like me in that space.
So are you now at this point exclusively, or do you have some holdovers from personal injury?
So in New Jersey, I'm exclusively family law. That relationship that I built with the firm in New York, with the personal injury firm, it's hard to let go of.
Hmm.
So every once in a while, they're not my cases, but if they need help, I step in because I feel like it's my baby too, after so many years working at the same firm. So when they need assistance with something, I'll step in. But for New Jersey, it's focused solely on family law.
So you hung out your shingle, you got an office. I see you have an office there. And you start. How many clients did you have to start with?
Zero, none. So I knew no attorneys that practiced family law in New Jersey when I started. I knew nothing about the court system in New Jersey when I started. I had practiced in New York. So I took that first year to learn. I took the first year to volunteer with volunteer lawyers for justice, legal services, anything that I could get some experience in while building my practical knowledge of the New Jersey system. Because yes, you compound knowledge, right? So 18 years as an attorney, great. But I had to now transition to a whole new practice, a whole new focus. That was interesting. So none, Zane. I came in just with passion and a goal.
So people don't understand that aren't attorneys. When you do those kind of volunteer things as an attorney, you kind of jump into the deep end, don't you, immediately, because you're dealing with people who don't have representation and you have to do everything, including, show up at trial unprepared, the whole. How did that experience shape where you are now?
It wasn't alone because you have mentors, right? So that's the great part of volunteering, especially in an area of practice that you don't have much experience in. You have the knowledge and the people at these volunteer groups that really hold your hand. So they know that perhaps this isn't something that you've done before. So they give you at least the outline. And honestly, again, I go back to the compounding knowledge. You kind of go, okay, this is where all of the experience that I have before, life experience, work experience, attorney experience, and put it forward to give this person who is underrepresented or not represented or wouldn't be represented the best version of yourself to give them the best outcome.
So how did this affect you financially to kind of just jump out and start, spending your a year volunteering, that has to have an impact on your personal situation.
I have to thank Jim Rohn for that one. So if you know anything about personal
I
development, the
I know Jim Rohn intimately.
be still my heart, Zane. What I would do to go back a few years to have actually heard him speak. When I decided to go on this journey, I decided while I was still working. So I was still at the personal injury firm. I spoke to the attorney. I said, okay, I think it's time. I had had a lot of, I guess, personal things going on. My mom had passed away. It was just, I needed something to fill my purpose again. And he's like, I got you. It's okay. Like, I know that this is what you've wanted to do. So I started trying to figure out how I was going to do it and how I was going to do it from scratch. And Jim Rohn, I found him on YouTube because you YouTubed. I was not a chat GPTer. So YouTube, all right, how do I get from where I am to where I want to be? And Jim Rohn, he's like on constant replay all day, every day between him and the others. But one of the things that I learned from him was you have to put basically all your ducks in a row before you make the jump. Yes, it could be very fulfilling, but you need to be lean first. Like I had to get my personal finances in order. I had to figure out how to do it with the least amount possible so that as I transitioned to this, it wasn't a huge shock to my system that things were going to go slow. I expected them to go slow. So I prepared for it to go slow. But I used Jim Rohn as a mentor and a guide to get the mindset to change. So I shifted my mindset before jumping in to AMG.
So I'm going to ask you some questions, as a potential client might ask you, or situations that a potential client might be going through. And I'm going to ask you from that perspective because I think that gives the audience some ideas about your way of thinking. So if my spouse just served me with divorce papers, what's the first thing I should do?
Speak to an attorney. Speak to an attorney because you have deadlines and you want to make sure that those deadlines are met. You want to get your financials together. You want to have a journal, really, and just write those feelings out, your expectations of what it's going to be. I mean, sometimes you don't expect it. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you've planned for it a little bit. Sometimes it's just kind of been something that's been in the works for a while. So you want to get those feelings out. You want to get what your goals are. You want to get what your non-negotiables are. And I think that doing that on paper before you speak to an attorney is always the best way. There's so many emotions and so many feelings that come up when you get served with those papers that you want to know kind of what the trajectory, how you want it to go. Do you want it to go through mediation? Are you okay with it? Is it something that you can work through amicably? So there's a lot of those feelings, and I feel like writing them on paper first contact an attorney because you don't want to miss your deadlines. Put stuff on paper. This way you can kind of be guided through how the next steps will go.
So I've been surprised. I've talked to several family attorneys that when a spouse gets served, how frequently they're absolutely blindsided. What's your experience on that?
The blindsided, I have to say, AMG is so young, right? Blindsided, I've seen maybe a handful of times, and that is a shock to the system. And the question sometimes, and again, sometimes the question is, can I oppose it? I don't
Mhm.
want to get divorced. So there's a lot of talking through that happens, and there's a lot of talking through that happens. But for the most part, what I've experienced is they kind of knew that it was happening, and now it's a
Right.
matter of how do we get from A to Z.
So, okay. So how fast can I actually get a restraining order if I'm scared to go home tonight?
Oh, immediately. You go either straight to the police department if the courts are closed. So if it's after hours, you go straight to a police department. Or if it's during court time, you can go straight to the court to request your temporary restraining order.
On the flip side, um, I went through a procedure, some decades ago, and we didn't have a restraining order, but if there would have been one, um, and it could have been served, um, you know, in a fraudulent manner, if you're on the other side, how do you deal with that? If you feel like the restraining order is completely unfair,
So you're served with the type with the TRO and you're like, this didn't happen, you can
right?
file an appeal. So you get served with it, you go to court, you don't take the matter into your own hands because if you violate that TRO, you will be arrested. You go to court, you file an appeal, you explain what it is. I mean, it depends on what the proof of the fraud is, right? But your first step is to file an appeal.
So, what's the difference between a temporary and a final restraining order, and why should that scare me?
So in New Jersey, final restraining orders are forever. So once a final restraining order is issued, there is it's very difficult to have it removed. Now, a temporary restraining order, you have the court says you have 10 days between the day that you're served with the TRO to the day the hearing happens. It's usually a little bit more than those 10 days. But a temporary is exactly that. It's a temporary restraining order. You go to a hearing or you resolve it with your partner or spouse. There's something called civil restraints if the parties agree, and a temporary restraining order can be dismissed. If there's a hearing and the judge determines that there is sufficient evidence of a predicate act of domestic violence, at that point, a final restraining order is issued. And again, permanent, there's fingerprinting, there's a fine, there's a registry. So you definitely want to try to avoid putting yourself in a position where that could happen.
So, a final restraining order, can there be so you said that's final and there's, that's the end of it. But is there sometimes a sunset clause within a final restraining order, like after 5 years it disappears, or is that it?
There is not, you would have to file a motion in court to have that final restraining order lifted, which is
Okay, that's
difficult.
interesting. So if I don't feel confident in English, how do I make sure I'm not missing something that's important in my case?
You find an attorney that speaks your language. Whether it's Spanish, you would contact me, or any different language, you'd contact your bar association, see if they have any attorneys that speak your language of preference. Obviously, people Google and just try to find someone that you can communicate with. Because a lot of what I feel is yes, Google can translate words for you, but it
Mhm.
can't translate the emotions.
Right. So how much can I try to handle myself before I actually need to hire a lawyer?
Great question, Zane. So I think that that's all person specific. However, I think that it's always better to have legal guidance because even if you represent yourself in court, the judges are going to expect you to follow the same rules of evidence. They're going to expect you to follow the same timeline, deadlines. And if you're not aware of them, you might end up hurting yourself in the long term.
So what do you see? Let's say you're sitting, getting ready for, to make your own pleading in a courtroom, and someone gets up and represents themselves. You're sitting there and you're watching what's going on. What's the one mistake that you've seen most commonly happen in that sort of situation?
Not knowing what the factors are to win your case. So let's take a temporary restraining order, for instance. If you are at your final restraining order hearing and you're representing yourself, there's a case Silver v. Silver. You should know that case because there's two prongs in order to have a final restraining order issued. There has to be a predicate act of domestic violence, which is enumerated in the statute, and you have to have fear. So if the judge asks you, well, are you fearful of your partner? And the answer is no, because at that particular moment, in that instance, you're not fearful because you're in a courtroom and there's court officers. That is something that you just lost your final restraining order hearing because you testified that you're not fearful.
Right.
So things
That's
like that.
interesting. So walk me through what actually happens the first time I set foot in the Bergen County Family Court.
With an attorney or without? So
I guess with an attorney, because I think most people will step in with an attorney, won't they?
it depends. I've seen a lot of self-represented litigants even when I'm there to represent someone. So what happens obviously depends on the type of case that you're there for. There's different dockets in the family court. There's the FV docket, which is for domestic violence. There's an FO docket, which is for contempt of temporary restraining orders, meaning you have a temporary restraining order issued against you and you violated it, either by a phone call or a text or whatever the case may be. So FV, FO, FD, which is for parties that are not married but have children in common. So custody, visitation, child support. I say visitation, I'm so used to it. I'm that old. It's called parenting time now, but custody, parenting time, child support, that's under the FD docket. And then there's the FM docket, which is for divorce. So depending on which one of those dockets you're stepping into family court for, different things may happen.
So tell me about a case that you were involved in that emotionally meant, something more to you than just another case.
So obviously, you know that I can't be specific with my cases, but generally the best one so far has been a dad that hasn't had overnights with his 3-year-old son or his 4-year-old son since the beginning of time. And we walked out of court after multiple court appearances. And he now has overnights with his son. And now he has the ability to travel with him and share experiences with him. By far, that's what makes all the hard worth it.
Mm-hmm. So how long does an uncontested divorce take from filing to final?
Depends on the court docket. You hope anywhere between 4 and 8 months. I mean, that's a lot. That's a big gap, but a lot of it also depends on the court calendar, right? So you can get a date and then the court can have something come up and have to adjourn your date. So you'd expect somewhere around that timeline.
Wow, that's a long time. If no contest, uncontested, it seems like a long time. Maybe I'm just kind of naive.
Well, because you file, then you have to wait to see whether the person answers, even if it's not contested. So not contested could be that they don't have children together, they don't have property together, but there still has to be an answer. If the other party doesn't answer, there still has to be a default. There has to be a motion for a default, say, okay, it was filed, but they didn't answer. So that takes time, and it's all time specific. So you get your default, the court may agree with you and say, fine, we will schedule a findings hearing. And that might not be for another 2 months. So some counties have a larger docket kind of in the flow than others.
So, what is a case information statement, and why does it terrify everyone who has to fill one out?
Because it's the Bible. It's the financial Bible in divorce cases, especially where you're seeking alimony or equitable distribution. It is very intensive. Most people don't know their finances that well. It asks about everything, including just normal living expenses. How much do you pay for your food and getting your hair and nails done, and just all of it, including obviously any investments you have, stocks, 401ks, pensions, vehicles, properties, and you live and die by your CIS. Even though it can be amended, you want to make sure that you have it as concise as possible. So you are getting all of your financials way ahead of when you're starting to fill it out. And also timelines. You have to file it very quickly. It is something that can take hours to do because you need the proof behind it. So you need all those financials. And then you're like, wait a second, I thought I was spending X amount on this, but my bank statements show I'm actually spending this amount. It's quite intense, especially if you don't like numbers.
Mm-hmm. So, if my ex and I agree on everything, do I really still need a lawyer?
Yes, just to review, make sure that everyone knows what their rights are. You might not know that you're giving up something that you otherwise wouldn't, or you're drafting your marital settlement agreement or your property settlement agreement. You're letting the court know there's no issues, or if there are issues, you can resolve them with your spouse. And you can say, okay, this is what we acquired during the marriage. This is how we're going to distribute it. But it's in a marital settlement agreement or a in an agreement. And you just want someone to review the agreement, make sure that, you haven't missed anything, that everything is stated the way that it should be on the document, and that you're not going to have any post-judgment issues in the future.
How does the court actually decide custody if both parties they don't agree? How does the court make a decision as to custody?
Great question. So in December, the answer probably would be different than it is now because the custody statute changed in January. The best interest of the child is always first and foremost. A judge is going to take a look at the health and safety of the child, is going to take a look at any prior domestic violence matters that may be associated with the family. They're going to take a look to see how the parents are communicating and where the child goes to school and where the parents are going to be living and how that really is going to affect the child as a whole. So the guiding star in any custody case, contested custody case, is the best interest of the child.
So it's always been traditionally in the past that the woman kind of got deference. The mother got deference in most cases. I don't know whether that's still exists. Can you talk about that a little bit?
There is no gender deference anymore. It is best interest of the child, and they look at both parents. Sometimes you undergo what's called the best interest evaluation. So a third party comes in, interviews mom, interviews dad, interviews the kids, interviews them all dad and kids together, mom and kids together, separately, teachers, doctors, whatever the case may be, in order to get a full picture of what is going on in this child's life.
Okay, I got some rapid fire questions for you. Just coffee or tea before a court appearance?
Coffee.
Fastest divorce has ever gone from filing to final?
5 months.
Spanish or English? Which language you thinking?
Great question. You know, I'm going to say it depends on what I'm thinking,
Okay.
because I think in both.
One one phrase you refuse to say to a client.
Oh, I will never say guaranteed.
Yeah, that's a good thing to avoid. So what's the biggest myth people believe about how divorce works in New Jersey?
That you can go to the $499 divorce attorney and have a divorce that is going to be post-judgment proof.
So, does hiring a lawyer make a divorce more of a fight? Because this is one thing that sometimes that you hear, like with uh, the idea that you need an attorney and you need to get every last drop of blood out of this that you possibly can. Advice, especially from friends and so forth. Um, I've just heard stories.
So the question was, does it
The
make it
question
more
was,
contentious?
does hiring a lawyer make a divorce more of a fight?
It depends on the parties and the lawyers. I love my colleagues, but it would depend on the parties and the lawyers.
Um, if I used AI to research my case, this is is that a good starting point or a trap? I guess this is more for a client who starts with using AI and making decisions on the basis of what AI gives them for legal advice.
Trap. It might be good at giving you an idea of where to go, but it will, unless you know what to ask it, it's not going to give you a proper output. So if you're new to it and you're just like, what do I do? It'll give you a general overview. New Jersey and New York are different. New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, all different. So trap for sure, unless you know what you're asking it.
So, is there really any such thing as an amicable divorce
Yes.
with kids?
Yes. It can happen. And it does happen. And where do I see it happening the most? I see it happening the most with parties that are getting divorced. They're both like, okay, it's come to an end for A, B, or C reason. Let's go to a mediator. They go to a mediator. They figure out what it is that how they're dividing all, their assets or their debts, because you divide your debts too, how they're dividing everything, what the kid's life is going to look like in terms of parenting time. The mediator prepares a memorandum of understanding, and they each go to their attorneys, their independent attorneys, to review the memorandum. One of the attorneys completes the marital or property settlement agreement, and they go to court and they're done. It can be that
So,
easy.
you represent both victims and people accused in restraining order cases. Um, how does that, the mental approach to that work?
You mean when at a trial or
Uh,
accepting the representation?
Just accepting the cases from both sides. How do you mentally adjust, for one versus the other? Or does it require a mental adjustment?
That's why that was the pause. I'm not exactly sure because you're representing your client to the best of your ability under the facts that you have, right? So if you have unfavorable facts, you're going to be letting your client know that there exists unfavorable facts, and hopefully you get, feedback, kind of putting them in context, because we as attorneys would only know what's on that temporary restraining order. speaking with clients, maybe you get a little bit more feedback. Maybe they have videos or they have audio that shows that it didn't happen that way. So you go into it with an open mind, because just because you're accused of something doesn't mean that it actually happened that way. And
Mhm.
there's been many instances where the audio recording or the video recording shows something different.
So here's kind of a layperson question. So you're approaching this case, and there's evidence that indicates your client is culpable in the situation. Do you ever just say, I just can't represent you as a client, you know, because I just don't, I'm not behind this.
Right. So I was going to say, I wouldn't necessarily say I can't represent you because I can't win. I would
No, not because
say,
you can't win, but
right,
because you can't get behind morally the situation.
absolutely. And that's part of why I love having AMG Law, right? Because I get to make those decisions. Just the same way that a client is coming to interview me to see if I'm a good fit, I'm interviewing a client to see if they're a good fit. And I get to make those decisions in the position where I am, as opposed to being at a firm where if the file comes in front of my desk, I have to work on it, whether I believe in it or not.
So what happens now? This is kind of another layperson question, but let's say you get into a case, and through your discovery, you find out, ooh, I really don't like what my client has done, and I didn't realize that they were doing this in the past. It wasn't disclosed. How does that work?
I can't lie. Under rules of professional conduct, I can't lie and I can't be made to lie. So it would be a discussion that I would have with a client as to what the next steps are.
Right. That would be a challenging discussion, I take it.
I haven't been there yet. I'm sure it will happen, but I stand firm in that I can't lie. I can't represent the lie, and we'd have to discuss it and at that point take the appropriate steps.
So, you helped the mother secure sole custody of her son. What made that case so difficult?
Because sometimes you get the facts, you see the facts, right? And it wasn't necessarily difficult. I'm pausing and I'm thinking, I'm like, I don't think it was. I think that that particular instance, it was the just result. Difficult because of the kids. You would hope, and I don't know, maybe that's just me and it's my background in foster care. You'd hope that there would be a way to find a way to find common ground so that a child could have meaningful relationships with both parents. Under that circumstance, it was the right one. But you still hold on to that little bit of, oh, if it could just be different.
Hmm.
The kid's life might just be different. I don't know.
Have you ever represented somebody who was wrongfully accused in a restraining order matter?
Yes.
And how did that play out?
Well for the client.
That's good enough. So, what did your years working with foster families teach you that law school just didn't touch?
Empathy. Highlighted, bolded, and underlined. Working in the foster care system is a different it's just a different beast, honestly. And you learn empathy because you go in thinking one thing and you see someone's living conditions, and then you speak to them and you have direct one-on-one, and you attend supervised visits between a biological parent and their child, and you see that glimmer of hope or that glimmer of love in their eyes, even though their current situation isn't there. And they are working towards making that situation better so they could be reunited with their child. And it just teaches empathy. It teaches you to not judge a book by its cover, to really take a step back and assess the whole, assess the situation as a whole.
So what percentage of your practice is Spanish speaking versus English speaking?
It's about 80-20, 75-25 Spanish.
And how did that all develop? So do you do marketing now in Spanish?
I do. So I have my social media in Spanish and English, and I found the statewide Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, who I can't rave enough about. They had a program called the Entrepreneurial Training Program. Now, the practice of law and the business of law, completely different. And marketing and advertising all falls under the business of law, which I
Mm-hmm.
had no experience in building a practice. And I have met so many great people through the chambers that have connected me with other people. And that's how I've been able to grow my practice from 0 clients to the phones ring. And I'm okay with that.
So where do you see yourself now? You're a sole practitioner. You do it all, but or as I understand, that was what I when I looked at when I did a little bit of background check on you. Where do you see yourself in a couple years from now, or 5 years from now, or is this where you want to be?
Practicing family law? Absolutely. A solo practitioner wearing all the hats? Absolutely not. So this summer, I actually onboarded an intern, and it's been great. My goal, really, the next steps is to hire someone full time once my intern goes back to college, which is going to be so sad. But I'm taking those next steps to hire someone. I have office space for them already ready. I am taking those next steps to be able to service a wider range of my community. Because as one person doing all of it, my reach is limited. So 5 years from now, I hope to see AMG Law on an office building staffed with paralegals, legal assistants. That's where I see my next five
So
years.
in Spanish and English, if someone's interested, where can people find you and reach out if they need help in New Jersey?
Me pueden llamar al número 201-474-5454. You can call me at 201-474-5454. My website is www.amglawllc.com. Mi página web es www.amglaw. I'm thinking my email address. Mi página web es www.amglawllc.com.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Ana Maria. It was an interesting topic. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was great to discuss it. And again, anyone can reach me at 201-474-5454. Thank you.
Okay.